And I think it's largely because their administration is full of people from the Center for New American Security, which is one of the largest arms-funded think tanks in the Beltway. And you have people like Tony Blinken who were acting when they weren't in government during the Trump era. They were acting as consultants for the military-industrial complex.
Has there been anything regarding the Russia and Ukraine war, since we're just talking about strictly how the American government has funded Ukraine or whatever? Has there been anything that Russia has done that you feel they should have done better, or it wasn't the right way to go?
I mean, I think the whole way that Russia handled it was basically not the right way to go. I think, during the Biden administration, it became very clear to the Russians that the U.S. was making Ukraine a de facto NATO member. That meant like carrying out massive war games inside Ukraine, training the Ukrainian army to NATO standards, and all but officially making Ukraine a member of the alliance. And so Russia tried to put a whole bunch of troops on Ukraine's border to get the West to negotiate. And, basically threatening them like, hey, we'll invade if you don't negotiate and agree that Ukraine's not going to become a member of NATO. They also made some other demands. I'm sure some of the stuff they were willing to, work with the West on, and some of the stuff was a little bit more concrete. Like, I'm guessing Russia was pretty serious about making the U.S. remove the Aegis Ashore systems. These are air defense systems. They're missile interceptors. However, the launchers for the missile interceptors could also fire nuclear-tipped cruise missiles, and were explicitly banned at one point by the Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces Treaty, but the U.S. has since left that. But Russia would like basically a return to that treaty, and for the U.S. to remove those systems from Europe. And so I think, with probably those two agreements, that NATO would stop treating Ukraine as a member and the American air defense systems being removed, I think Russia would have been willing to compromise there and remove the troops from Ukraine's border with no invasion. However, the West refused to negotiate, and then Ukraine ramped up on attacks on the Russian backed forces in Ukraine, because Ukraine had been in the middle of a civil war since 2014. And so, as the Russian military buildup is going on along Ukraine's border, there's also a civil war going on in that country, and Russia backed one side in that civil war, the people of the Donbass region. And so in the days before, Ukraine ramped up attacks on the Donbass region. And I think, this is my interpretation, we obviously don't know what was happening in the halls of the Kremlin, but I think Russia basically felt like their bluff was called. They didn't intend to invade, but they felt like their bluff was called. And then rather than doing what I would have, thought would have been the smart move, which would have been regroup, make sure you have like a solid game strategy here, they decided to go ahead and invade. And that invasion pushed their troops close to Kiev, because what we saw in the early days of the war, there were basically two different very serious negotiation efforts that Ukraine and Russia were engaged in the first 3 months. And one was mediated by the Israelis. And we have statements from the Israeli prime minister at the time, Naftali Bennett, about how basically the West discouraged talks, and that's the reason a deal didn't get done. And then there was another effort mediated by Turkey and the UN. And we have essentially the same thing coming from the Turkish foreign minister at the time, saying that there were parties in the West that didn't want to make a deal. But the most concrete reporting we have on this is that at the same time, the UK prime minister, then Boris Johnson, that dumpy looking dude, he goes to Kiev and tells Zelensky that the West, because at this time, the West had only sent Ukraine about $1 billion or so in weapons. And he tells Zelensky that the West is willing to make a serious commitment to Ukraine's war effort if Ukraine won't make the deal with Russia. And so Zelensky agrees to that, and the West starts sending weapons, and talks are off then.